I used to believe my father when he said hard work could fix anything. But after he died and the world forgot his name, I realized something. Some things can't be repaired with tools and sweat alone. Some things are meant to stay broken until fate decides otherwise. My name's Aaron Cole. I'm 31 and I fix cars that nobody else wants to touch. The kind that sit in a junkyard for years, rust crawling through their frames like a disease. It's not glamorous. I don't own a mansion or a company or even a new truck. I run my father's old garage, a small shop with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that reads Cole's Auto. People around town whisper that I should have sold it long ago. But I didn't, because this garage is the last thing my dad left me. He taught me every sound a car can make, every smell of burning oil and leaking coolant. Listen close, he'd say, tapping his ear. Engines talk, you just gotta learn their language. But ever since his death, business has been quiet, too quiet. Folks go to the new repair chains now, all shiny floors and free coffee. My garage smells like grease, rust, and old memories. I kept it open out of stubbornness, not profit. One cold October morning, I was underneath a busted '72 Chevy pickup when a voice broke through the silence. "You still fix things nobody wants, huh?" I slid out from under the truck and wiped my hands. Standing in front of me was a man in a charcoal coat, mid-50s, with a face I couldn't place. He looked like the kind of man who never had to work for anything: clean shoes, sharp watch, the kind of confidence you can only buy. "Depends on what's broken," I said. He smiled faintly. "My car's out front. Won't start. Tow company said you were the best with old engines." When I walked outside, I saw the car. It wasn't just any car. It was a 1965 Mustang Fastback, the kind of machine collectors dream about. But this one looked tired, dust covering its hood, paint dull, tires flat. "She's been sitting a while," I said, circling it. "Long while," he replied. "She belonged to someone I knew, someone important." Something in his tone made me stop. "Who?" He looked at me for a moment, as if weighing whether to say it. Then he said my father's name. My heart stuttered. "You knew my dad." "Knew him well," he said. "He worked on this car years ago, told me it had a secret built into it, something he wanted his son to find one day." I laughed, but my voice cracked. A secret? My dad barely had money for dinner, let alone hidden treasures. The man's gaze didn't waver. He said his son would understand when the time came. I think that time's now. He left the car, the keys, and a folded envelope on the hood and drove away without another word. Inside the envelope was a handwritten note, creased and faded. It was my father's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. "Aaron," it read, "if you're reading this, it means the car found its way back to you. Everything I couldn't tell you when I was alive is in this car. Fix it like we used to, but listen close. It's trying to tell you something." My hands shook as I read those words. I didn't understand what he meant. But that night after closing the shop, I pushed the Mustang inside and locked the doors. The rain outside drummed on the roof as I lifted the hood. The engine was original, untouched, but every wire and bolt carried a story. I worked for hours changing plugs, draining old oil, replacing filters. The smell of fuel and metal filled the air, and for the first time in years, I felt like Dad was right there beside me. Around midnight, I found something odd. The left side of the firewall had been welded shut, unevenly. Dad never left sloppy work. I scraped away the grime and found a small engraving beneath the metal, *C17. Curiosity burned through me. I grabbed my grinder and cut through the weld line. Sparks flew like tiny meteors, and after a few minutes the panel came loose. Behind it was a small compartment, a hidden cavity. Inside it lay a single brass key wrapped in an oily rag. I turned it over in my hand. It was old, ornate, with numbers carved faintly along its stem. *04-22-97. My birthday. There was also a second note tucked beneath the key. It was written in my dad's hand again, but this time the ink had bled through the paper, as if he'd written it in a hurry. "If you found this, go to the place where we fixed our first car together. The one that caught fire. You'll know what to do." My stomach twisted. That car, the one he was talking about, was an old Buick that we repaired behind an abandoned warehouse outside town. The same place I hadn't been in over 15 years. I thought about leaving it alone. Maybe it was just one of Dad's cryptic jokes. But that key, the numbers, the way the stranger spoke, they wouldn't leave my mind. The next morning, I loaded the Mustang's parts back into the shop and drove my old pickup to the edge of town. The warehouse was still there, its corrugated walls rusting and the sign half gone. The air smelled like wet metal and dust. Inside, I could still see the black scorch marks on the floor from the fire we'd started that summer. I remembered Dad laughing, saying, "Guess we'll call that an upgrade." I searched every corner but found nothing, until I kicked a loose floorboard and heard something hollow beneath it. I knelt down, pried it open, and found a small iron box covered in soot. My heart raced as I pulled out the brass key. It fit perfectly. The lock clicked open. Inside was a single photograph, Dad standing in front of a vintage car showroom I'd never seen before. Behind him, a sign read Cole Heritage Motors. On the back of the photo, scrawled in the same hurried handwriting, were 6 words. They hid everything. Find the other key. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every memory, every story Dad ever told about his past. He'd never mentioned any other family business, any company. We barely had enough money to keep the lights on, and now I was holding a photograph that hinted at a legacy I knew nothing about. The next morning I called the number of the man who'd left the car, the one who claimed to know Dad, but his number was disconnected, so I did the only thing that made sense. I went back to the Mustang. I examined every inch of the car, seats, dash, trunk, undercarriage. And then under the passenger seat I found another engraving, Harrison and Ward Motors, S. 1968. I searched the name online, but there was almost nothing, except one archived business registration canceled 2 decades ago. The registered owner, Samuel Cole, my grandfather. I froze. Dad never once mentioned his father, ever. I thought he'd grown up alone, same as me. But the registration listed an address, an estate outside of Atlanta, Georgia, a private property long abandoned, and something in me knew that's where the other key would lead. As I packed my bag and closed the garage that night, I looked up at the flickering neon sign, Cole S. Aught, and realized it wasn't just a shop. It was a message, a breadcrumb. Maybe Dad had been trying to leave me more than a business. Maybe he'd been trying to leave me a truth too dangerous to speak aloud. When I turned off the lights, the Mustang gleamed faintly in the darkness, as if waiting for me to take the next step. I didn't know it yet, but what I was about to uncover would not only change everything I thought I knew about my family, it would make me question whether I'd ever truly known my father at all. The next morning, the air was thick with fog as I hit the highway. The Mustang's photograph sat on the passenger seat beside me like a ghost staring back. I couldn't stop replaying the thought. Why would my father hide a key, a note, and a trail that led all the way to Georgia? What could possibly be waiting there that he hadn't told me? The old roads outside town stretched endlessly, lined with pine trees and empty fields. Every few miles, I'd pass a sign so faded it barely held meaning anymore. I stopped once for gas in a town so small it didn't even have a name on the map. The attendant, a man in overalls, watched me closely as I filled the tank. "You from around here?" he asked. "Not really, just passing through." He nodded toward the Mustang. "That's a classic. Haven't seen one like that in years." "It belonged to my dad," I said, without realizing the weight those words carried. "Good man?" the attendant asked. "The best," I replied, but he left me a few questions. He chuckled softly. "Fathers have a habit of doing that. Sometimes finding the answers hurts more than not knowing." He didn't know it, but those words sat heavy in my chest for the next 100 miles. By the time I reached Atlanta, the sun had begun to dip below the skyline, painting the city in gold and shadow. The address from the business registration led me to the outskirts, to a road that wound through trees and overgrown grass. There was no gate, no sign of life, just a cracked driveway leading to what looked like a forgotten mansion swallowed by vines and silence. I parked in front of the massive iron gates and climbed out. A rusted plaque hung from one hinge, barely readable, Cole Heritage Motors. The house loomed behind the gates, 3 stories tall, windows boarded, roof sagging in parts. Yet beneath the decay I could still sense its former glory, the grand columns, the wraparound porch, the ghost of wealth long buried. I pushed open the gate. It groaned like an old animal. The front door was locked, but the side door gave way after a few hard pushes. The air inside was stale, filled with dust and something else, something faintly metallic. My boots echoed across marble floors covered in debris. Faded portraits lined the hallway. One of them made me stop cold. It was my father, younger, standing beside an older man who looked like him. Same eyes, same jawline. My grandfather. And behind them, half hidden by shadow, was the same Mustang. I took the frame off the wall and turned it over. On the back, in my father's handwriting, were 3 words: Garage, East Wing. The east wing was darker, colder. I used the flashlight on my phone to navigate the hall until I found a heavy steel door. A faded authorized personnel-only sign still hung from it. The handle was rusted, but I forced it open. What I saw inside stopped me in my tracks. Rows of covered vehicles stretched across the vast room, each draped in gray cloth. I pulled one back, then another. Beneath them were vintage cars, pristine, untouched. Jaguars, Cadillacs, Aston Martins. All classics. All perfectly preserved. It was like stepping into a time capsule. My father had always said our family never had money, yet here it was, a fortune in automotive history gathering dust. Then I noticed something strange. In the far corner of the garage stood a single empty space, surrounded by tire marks and old oil stains. On the wall above it was a symbol carved into the cement, a small brass plate engraved with the same code from the Mustang, C17. The space wasn't empty. It was waiting for the Mustang. I walked toward the wall and noticed a small indentation shaped like a keyhole. My heart began to pound. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the brass key my father had left me. It slid in perfectly. When I turned it, the wall made a deep mechanical click. For a moment, nothing happened. Then with a slow grinding sound, the concrete panel beside it shifted, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a metal briefcase coated in dust. I hesitated, then lifted it out. It was heavy, too heavy for just papers. I set it on a workbench and snapped it open. Inside was a stack of old ledgers, company documents, and photographs. The top page was a contract dated 1974 between Cole Heritage Motors and a corporation named Darrow Industries. The signature at the bottom was my grandfather S. Another folder contained blueprints, designs for advanced engine prototypes decades ahead of their time. My father's name was scribbled in the corner of one, next to the words Cole Hybrid Drive Confidential. And beneath that was a sealed envelope with my name written across it. My breath caught. I opened it carefully. Aaron, the letter began. If you're reading this, you found what they tried to erase. Your grandfather built something revolutionary. A new kind of hybrid engine, cleaner, faster, worth billions. But he trusted the wrong people. Darrow stole the design, buried the company, and destroyed our name to keep the profits. I tried to fight them, but they threatened us. They said if I ever revealed the truth, they'd make sure you never knew who you really were. I stared at the letter, my hands trembling. Everything you need to prove our family's ownership is in this case, it continued. The world believes Darrow Industries invented the Cole Hybrid. They didn't. We did. The other key unlocks what they couldn't destroy. A backup design stored in a place only family can access. The letter ended with coordinates, latitude and longitude, and one final line. Don't let them find it before you do. I folded the letter slowly, my heart racing with a mix of anger and disbelief. My entire life, I'd believed my father was just a mechanic struggling to make ends meet. Now I was standing in the ruins of what should have been an empire, our empire. A noise echoed through the garage, a soft thud followed by footsteps. I froze, extinguished my flashlight, and ducked behind one of the covered cars. The footsteps grew closer, slow and deliberate. A man's silhouette appeared near the entrance, illuminated faintly by moonlight. He was tall, wearing a long coat. "Mr. Cole." The voice called out, "We've been looking for you." I didn't move. "We know you found something," he said. "You shouldn't have come here. This place belongs to Darrow Industries now." My pulse hammered in my ears. Whoever he wasn't bluffing. The man took another step forward, the light glinting off something metallic in his hand. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I bolted from behind the car, grabbed the briefcase, and sprinted toward the back exit. The sound of boots pounded behind me. I shoved open a service door and burst into the night. The cold air hit me like a wall. I jumped into my truck, slammed the door, and started the engine. As I sped down the dirt road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Headlights appeared behind me, closing fast. I pressed harder on the gas, the tires skidding on wet gravel. The briefcase lay on the seat beside me, the letter burning in my pocket. I didn't know who those men were, but they clearly knew about my father's secret, and they weren't going to let me keep it. After 20 minutes of weaving through back roads, I managed to lose them near an old bridge. I pulled over beneath the trees, breathing hard. My hands shook as I opened the briefcase again, flipping through the documents, trying to understand how deep this went. The name Darrow Industries appeared again and again: patent transfers, legal threats, payments marked as settlements. It wasn't just theft, it was an entire cover-up. As the night stretched on, I realized something chilling. My father must have known they were still watching him. That's why he'd hidden the truth inside the Mustang, inside something only I would ever look for. And now, the same people who destroyed his legacy knew I was alive and searching. I leaned back in the seat, the hum of the engine fading into silence. Through the windshield, the moonlight glowed faintly against the fog, casting a pale shimmer on the brass key. The coordinates from the letter were still burning in my mind, calling me forward. Wherever they led, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about a legacy stolen, a truth buried, and a family name that someone had tried very hard to erase. And I wasn't about to let them win. I barely slept that night. Every sound outside my window set my nerves on edge: the distant hum of a truck, the soft creak of the trees. I knew I wasn't paranoid. Those men had followed me once, and if they knew about the letter, they wouldn't stop until they got it. By dawn, I was already on the road again, heading south toward the coordinates scribbled in my father's handwriting. They led to a small coastal town called Seabridge, the kind of place that hadn't changed in 50 years. The ocean was gray, restless, and the smell of salt and rust filled the air. According to the GPS, the location was less than a mile from the docks, at the edge of an old shipyard long shut down. When I pulled up, the gate was locked, but the padlock was so corroded it broke easily under a hammer I kept in the glove box. The yard stretched wide: abandoned boats, rusted cranes, broken hulls stacked like tombstones. I walked through puddles of oil and rainwater until I reached a small storage warehouse with a faded number painted on the door: 17. C-17. My heart thudded. I stepped closer. The door was chained, but a single bolt cutter made quick work of it. Inside, sunlight filtered through cracked glass panels, cutting through layers of dust. The air smelled of salt and engine grease. In the center of the room sat something under a tarp, tall and rectangular. I pulled it back, and there it was. A safe. Old, industrial, heavy enough to crush my leg if it fell. And right in the middle of its rusted face, another keyhole identical to the one in the garage wall. I hesitated, then slid the second key, the one I'd found taped behind the Mustang's seat, into the slot. It turned with a deep, metallic click. The sound echoed through the entire building like a bell being struck. The door creaked open, and inside were stacks of folders, photographs, and hard drives sealed in plastic. A small metal box sat on top, engraved with my father's initials. I opened it and found one last note, written in the same familiar script. "Aaron, if you've come this far, you're ready for the truth. Inside these drives is everything they stole from us, the real designs, the test data, and proof of the theft. But this is bigger than our family now. Darrow Industries didn't just steal from us. They built their empire on lies. Expose them and you'll not only reclaim our name, you'll destroy theirs. Be careful. They've been watching since before you were born." As I read, the sound of gravel crunching outside snapped my focus. I peeked through a crack in the door. A black SUV had pulled up near the gate. Two men stepped out, dressed in dark suits, scanning the yard like they knew exactly where to look. I grabbed the drives and papers, stuffed them into my bag, and slipped out through a side exit. The rain had started again, thin needles pelting my face as I ducked behind a row of decaying boat hulls. My boots splashed silently through puddles as I moved toward the docks. The men were close now. I could hear their voices. "He's here. The tracker says the signal stopped inside the yard." "Tracker?" My stomach dropped. They must have planted something on the Mustang. I reached the end of the pier and looked around. My only option was a small fishing boat tied loosely to a post, the name Mara faded on its side. I jumped aboard, started the old outboard engine, and pulled away just as one of the men shouted. Gunfire cracked through the air. Bullets hit the water behind me, sending sprays of salt up like tiny geysers. I ducked low and kept the throttle down, steering hard into the open sea. The shoreline grew smaller behind me, and the storm rolled in fast. By the time I was miles out, the rain turned into a wall. The ocean roared, waves crashing against the boat like fists. I fought the wheel until I saw a faint light flickering ahead, a lighthouse, half collapsed but still standing on a rocky outcrop. I aimed the boat toward it, praying it wasn't a mirage. When I finally reached it, the wind nearly tore the door off its hinges. Inside, the air was cold and damp. I dropped the bag on the floor, soaked to the bone, chest heaving. The lighthouse still had an old generator which sputtered to life after a few kicks. I spread the documents across the floor. The more I read, the clearer it became. My grandfather's engine design wasn't just revolutionary, it was suppressed. Darrow Industries had bribed officials, falsified patents, and paid off anyone who could expose them. And my father had spent his entire life trying to rebuild the truth, hiding pieces of it in places only I could find. One photo caught my eye. It showed my father with another man, the same one who'd brought me the Mustang. The back of the photo had one name written on it: Reed. I remembered the stranger's voice at the garage. The way he said he knew my father, so he wasn't just a random messenger, he was part of this. Maybe even the last person Dad trusted. My phone buzzed suddenly. Unknown number. For a second I thought about ignoring it, but then I answered. "Aaron Cole," the voice said, calm and familiar. "Glad to see you made it to Seabridge." "Reed." A pause, then, "I told you the car would find you when it was time." "What is this?" I demanded. "Why did you bring me into this? Those men almost killed me." "Because your father couldn't finish what he started," Reed replied. "He tried to expose them, but he knew they'd come for you next. He made me promise that when you were ready, I'd give you the trail." "So what now?" "Now," he said, "you finish it. The proof you found, it's enough to take Darrow down, but only if you can get it into the right hands. There's a journalist in D.C. named Lena Graves. Your father trusted her once. She's waiting for you, but you'll have to move fast. They're already tracking your phone." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stared at the screen. No signal, no location, just the echo of Reed's words. I knew what I had to do. By the next morning, I was back on land, the bag clutched to my chest as I boarded a train headed north. Every stop felt like a countdown, every passing mile a race against time. I didn't eat, didn't sleep. My mind was a storm, images of my father, the Mustang, the letters, the gunfire. When the train finally reached D.C., it was well past midnight. The city lights blurred through the rain-streaked windows like streaks of gold and white. I took a cab to the address Reed had sent earlier in a text before my phone lost signal, a small apartment above a bookstore. When I knocked, the door opened to reveal a woman in her 40s, sharp-eyed and cautious. "You must be Aaron," she said quietly. "Come in, quickly." The apartment smelled of coffee and old paper. She motioned to the bag in my hand. "That's it, isn't it, the proof?" I nodded and handed it over. She flipped through the papers with a precision that told me she'd done this kind of thing before. Her expression shifted from curiosity to shock. "My God," she whispered. This could rewrite everything. Darrow's entire fortune, every patent, every deal, it's all stolen. Do you have any idea what this means? I just know it cost my father his life, I said. She looked at me for a long time, then closed the folder. We'll publish it, but you need to disappear for a while. Once this goes public, they'll come after anyone connected to you. I shook my head. No, I'm not hiding anymore. The next few days passed in a blur of secrecy and adrenaline. Lena worked quietly, verifying every document, every design. The night before the article went live, she called me to her office. "It's ready," she said, eyes glinting. "Tomorrow morning, the world will know who really built the coal hybrid." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the small motel room staring at the Mustang parked outside under the flickering streetlight. I thought about my father's laugh, his hands covered in grease, his voice telling me engines talk if you listen close. By sunrise, the article was everywhere. Headlines blazed across every news channel. Darrow Industries exposed, decades of fraud uncovered. The company's stock plummeted. Federal investigations launched within hours. And for the first time in my life, the name Cole meant something again, not as a forgotten mechanic, but as the rightful inventor of a legacy stolen long ago. But even as victory settled in, I knew it wasn't over. Darrow's CEO, Raymond Darrow, wasn't the type to go down quietly. And the next time I saw his face, it wouldn't be on a television screen. It would be in person. I thought exposing Darrow Industries would bring peace. But peace never comes easy when you drag truth out of the dirt. For a few weeks, it felt like victory. The headlines, the calls from reporters, the flood of messages from engineers and workers who had once been silenced. My father's name was everywhere. The coal hybrid was finally recognized for what it was, a miracle stolen by greed. But then came the threats. It started with phone calls in the middle of the night, no voice, just breathing. Then came the car parked across the street from my shop, the same black SUV I'd seen at the shipyard. I knew what it meant. Darrow wasn't done. They might have lost their empire, but powerful men don't vanish overnight. They regroup. They retaliate. I didn't tell Lena. She was already risking enough by publishing the story. Instead, I went back to my father's garage, the place where everything began. Cole's auto looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. The air was heavier now, charged with something I couldn't name. The Mustang still sat in the corner, polished, silent, almost like it was waiting for me to sit behind the wheel again. That night, I opened the briefcase one last time. Among the papers, I found one document I hadn't noticed before, a letter of sale dated 20 years ago. It showed that Darrow Industries had purchased land in Arizona under a fake subsidiary name. My father's signature was on it, but the handwriting was wrong. Someone had forged it. The address on the document matched the location of an old research facility, one Darrow had kept off the books. If my father had hidden proof of the coal hybrid, maybe this place held what Darrow had buried next. I left before dawn. The drive to Arizona took almost 2 days. The desert stretched endlessly, a vast expanse of dust and forgotten history. By the time I reached the coordinates, I was running on fumes and coffee. The facility was surrounded by a chain-link fence, half collapsed. The building itself was a ruin, cracked windows, sand piled in corners, the remnants of a company that wanted the world to forget. Inside, it was quiet except for the wind humming through broken vents. Rows of metal tables were covered in tarps, files scattered everywhere. I moved carefully, flashlight cutting through the dark. Most of it was junk, old schematics, burned folders. But then I saw it. A glass case, half buried under debris with a metal plaque reading, Prototype 1 Coal Hybrid Engine. I brushed away the dust and my throat tightened. It was real. My father's design, the one he said could change the world. Compact, efficient, years ahead of its time. I couldn't believe it had survived. But before I could take a closer look, a voice echoed from behind me. "Mr. Cole, you've been busy." I turned. Standing near the doorway was a man in a gray suit, tall, polished, carrying the same arrogance I'd seen in every Darrow press photo. Raymond Darrow himself. "You stole from us," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You destroyed my family." He smirked, stepping closer. Stole? No, Aaron, we saved your father's work. He didn't have the resources, the power, the reach. We did. And now you've ruined it. Congratulations, you've won the moral war. But what will that get you? Fame, money. Because I can promise you it won't last. You buried his name for profit, I snapped. I built an empire, he countered. Do you have any idea how much your father begged for a deal? He came to me first. He wanted his name on something bigger, something lasting. But when he realized what that meant, he panicked. He tried to pull out. So yes, I did what I had to. He never begged, I said. He fought you until his last breath. Darrow's smile thinned. Then he was a fool. And you, well, you're just his shadow, trying to resurrect a name that's already been written out of history. He took another step forward. I could see the faint bulge of a weapon under his jacket. Walk away, Aaron, he said. You've already done enough damage. Let the world move on. I clenched my fists. You killed him, didn't you? His silence said more than any confession ever could. I took a step toward the prototype. This is proof, I said, proof that he was right. Darrow's hand moved toward his side. And what will you do with proof if no one ever sees you again? The moment stretched thin. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then instinct took over. I kicked over a nearby table and dove behind a steel beam just as a gunshot cracked through the air. Sparks flew from the wall beside me. I grabbed a wrench from the floor and flung it at the light above him. It shattered, plunging the room into darkness. Another shot rang out. I crawled low, moving toward the exit. My fingers brushed against something metal, a fire extinguisher. I yanked the pin and sprayed blindly toward the sound. A curse echoed in the haze. I ran. Outside, the night air was cold, sharp, filled with the smell of gunpowder and sand. I jumped into my truck, slammed the door, and sped down the dirt road, tires spitting dust behind me. My hands trembled on the wheel. In the rearview mirror, headlights appeared again, 2 sets this time. They were gaining fast. I veered off the road into the desert, weaving through rock and scrub until I reached an old bridge spanning a dry riverbed. I stopped in the middle, grabbed the prototype from the back seat, and ran to the edge. The truck stopped behind me. Darrow stepped out, flanked by 2 men. Don't be stupid, he called out. That's worth more than your life. It already cost one, I said. I won't let it take another. He stepped closer, his voice calm, controlled. You think you're some kind of hero. You're just a mechanic playing in a world that eats men like you alive. Hand it over, and I'll let you walk away. I looked down at the dry river below, then back at him. My father taught me something, I said quietly. Machines can break, but so can men who think they're untouchable. Before he could respond, I hurled the prototype off the bridge. It shattered against the rocks below, scattering into 100 glittering pieces. Darrow froze, eyes wide with disbelief. You fool! He shouted. Do you know what you've done? Yeah, I said. I ended it. He raised his gun, fury twisting his face. But before he could fire, headlights flared behind him. Sirens wailed. 2 black government SUVs pulled up, lights blinding. FBI. A voice shouted, "Drop your weapon." Darrow hesitated. Then the agents moved in, shouting commands, forcing him to the ground. The men beside him didn't resist. Within minutes, they were in cuffs. Lena stepped out from one of the vehicles, coat whipping in the wind. She met my eyes, a faint smile crossing her face. I told you I wasn't done helping, she said. They've been watching him since the story broke. We just needed him to make a move. I nodded, still catching my breath. Guess he did. Darrow glared at me as they led him away. You think this ends with me? There are others, bigger than you can imagine. Then I'll find them too, I said. When the last vehicle disappeared into the horizon, the desert fell silent again. I stood at the edge of the bridge, the broken remains of my father's creation glinting faintly in the moonlight. It was over. Not cleanly, not perfectly, but it was over. A week later, I returned to the garage. The sign still flickered, the smell of oil and dust still lingered, but the silence was different now. It wasn't empty, it was peaceful. I sat in the Mustang, the same seat where it all began, and stared at the old photo of my father I kept on the dashboard. You were right, Dad. I whispered. Engines talk, you just have to listen. The car gleamed softly in the afternoon sun, and for the first time in years I let myself smile. My father's legacy was no longer hidden in the shadows. It was alive, roaring quietly in every heartbeat, every spark, every breath. And so was I. The months that followed felt unreal. Darrow Industries collapsed faster than anyone expected. The government seized their assets, their board scattered, and for the first time in half a century the coal name stood tall again. My father's invention, the hybrid engine that could have changed everything, was now public record. Universities wanted to study it, companies wanted to license it, and people who once called him crazy now called him a visionary. But for me, it wasn't about fame. It was about peace, the kind my father never got to see. I spent most of my days back at the garage fixing cars like nothing had changed, though everything had. People came from all over just to shake my hand, to tell me how my father's story had inspired them. I smiled, nodded, thanked them, but part of me stayed quiet, the part that knew this story wasn't finished. One late evening I was closing up the shop when the doorbell chimed. I turned, expecting a customer, but froze. Reed stood there. He looked older, more worn than before, but his eyes still carried that calm steadiness. He smiled faintly. "You did it," he said. "Your father would have been proud." I wiped my hands on a rag. "You disappeared." "I had to," he said simply. "There were people watching, and if they found me, they'd have found you. But once I saw what you did, I knew it was time to come back." I nodded slowly. "You worked for him, didn't you, my father?" Reed's expression softened. "I worked with him. He was more than my boss, he was my friend. When Darrow came for him, I was there that night. I saw what they did." My chest tightened. "You mean when they forced him out?" He hesitated, eyes darkening. "Forced, yes, but it was worse than that. He refused to sign over the final patent. They threatened his life, his family. That's when he hid everything, every design, every document. Then he sent me away with one message: 'When Aaron's ready, give him the key.'" I swallowed hard, my throat burning. He knew they'd come for him. Reed nodded. "He knew, and he accepted it. He believed that if he couldn't finish it, you would. And you did." Silence filled the room, heavy but peaceful. After a moment, Reed placed something on the counter. A small, rusted metal emblem shaped like a gear, engraved with the initials EC. "Your father's first prototype badge," he said. "He gave it to me the day he completed the coal hybrid engine. Said it represented the heart of invention, the part that keeps everything moving, no matter how broken the machine looks from the outside." I stared at the emblem, running my thumb over the worn edges. "He wanted you to have it," Reed added. "I think it's time it came home." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Instead, I just nodded, my eyes burning as I slipped the emblem into my pocket. After Reed left, I locked the shop and stood outside under the stars. The night was cool, the kind of silence that hums instead of screams. For the first time in years, I felt like my father was there, somewhere in the quiet, watching. Weeks later, I got a call from Lena. The documentary she'd been working on about the coal legacy was finally done. "You should see it," she said. "It's not just your story, it's your father's redemption." When it aired, the world saw the truth. Old footage of my father in his workshop, grease on his hands, that familiar half-smile on his face. Then the interviews, engineers, mechanics, family, friends, all saying the same thing. He was never after fame or fortune. He just wanted to build something that lasted. The film ended with a clip of the Mustang driving down an empty road, the camera pulling back until it vanished into the horizon. The narrator's voice said, "Sometimes the engines we build don't just move cars, they move generations." I watched it alone in the shop, the hum of the projector blending with the sound of rain outside. When it ended, I didn't cry. I just sat there, hands resting on the same workbench where my father once stood, and whispered, "We did it, Dad." Life slowly found its rhythm again. I expanded the garage, hired 2 apprentices, both kids from town who reminded me of myself at their age, curious, restless, hungry to learn. I taught them what my father taught me: precision, patience, pride in the work. Then one day, while sorting through the last of the old documents, I found a letter I'd somehow missed. It was short, just a few lines in my father's writing. "Son, if you're reading this, it means the truth is finally free. But remember, the coal legacy isn't just about machines. It's about resilience. Keep building, not for fame, not for money, but for the people who believe they're not enough. Because one day, something you build might remind them they are." I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the glove box of the Mustang. From then on, I started restoring old engines not to sell, but to teach. Every Saturday, the garage opened its doors to kids from around the city. Some came from broken homes, some just needed a place to belong. I told them what my father once told me: an engine's just metal until someone gives it a purpose. Over time, word spread. People started calling it the Coal Workshop, a place where lost kids found direction. News outlets came, sponsors offered funding, but I refused most of it. This was never about the money. It was about legacy, about turning something broken into something that worked again. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, I stood outside the shop watching the kids laugh, the smell of oil and summer air mixing around us. I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace, real peace. Then, just as I was locking up, a car pulled into the driveway, a sleek black sedan. For a second my heart tensed, but then the door opened and a young woman stepped out dressed in a simple navy suit. "Mr. Cole?" she asked. "That's me." She handed me an envelope, embossed with a gold seal. "I represent the board at Cole Heritage Technologies," she said, "the new foundation being built from what used to be Darrow Industries. The government has reassigned the company assets, and they'd like you to serve as its executive director." I blinked. "You want me to run it?" "Not just run it," she said, smiling faintly. "Rebuild it, the right way, under your family's name." For a long moment I couldn't speak. The world had come full circle. The company that once buried my father's dream was now offering me the chance to resurrect it. I accepted. But I made one condition: that the company fund education programs for young engineers, especially those without privilege or resources. She agreed without hesitation. Months later, I stood on a stage at the reopening ceremony of Cole Heritage Technologies. The new logo shone behind me, a gear wrapped in wings, the same emblem my father had designed decades ago. Reporters filled the room, cameras flashing, but all I saw was his face in the crowd that wasn't there. "This isn't about revenge," I said to the audience. "It's about rebuilding what was broken. My father once told me that real power doesn't come from engines or machines, it comes from persistence, from believing that even when the world forgets you, your work can still matter." The applause was thunderous. That night I drove the Mustang out to the coast. The wind rushed past as the headlights cut through the darkness, the hum of the engine deep and steady. I parked by the cliffs, stepped out, and watched the ocean stretch endlessly beneath the stars. In the reflection of the water, I saw the faint outline of my father beside me, his hand on my shoulder, his voice in the wind saying, "Keep building, son." And I realized something I'd never understood before. The legacy he left wasn't in patents, engines, or headlines. It was in me. It was in every person who ever believed they were worth more than the world told them. And as I started the car and drove back into the night, I knew one truth that would never fade. No machine runs forever, but some legacies do.